First of all, let me welcome you to our United States Senate practice debate. These are delegates of the high school variety that will be acting as your chairs today. They have a wealth of experience that you will be drawing on. So see them not just as the conductors of your debate, but also as people you can ask for advice.
A leader is someone who is able to express their opinions while also being able to push others to do the same. Leadership is not simply defined by the amount of times that you are called upon today, or if you are a lead sponsor on a bill, but by the amount of people you inspire and touch by your actions and your words.
Sometimes it's not about getting to a resolution, it's not about solving the problem completely, but it's about growth, and it's about how you interact with your fellow delegates. That is why I stress the importance that you all use diplomacy and you all think about the words before you say them, because diplomacy will help you get very far in life, and it will help you keep your relationships with your fellow delegates, as well as your family, your friends, your teachers, and the rest of the world.
Who's ready to get this party started? Is people excited? Yeah? I can feel it. All right.
Why are you here today? Whatever the case is, you're here now. And what I want you to do today is to learn something from this conference and make sure this experience is valuable for you.
Whatever your objective for the day is, whether it's to repeatedly speak in front of the entire Senate, or improve your bill and amendment writing skills, or even just get to know some new people within LCM, I urge you to keep your goal or goals in mind throughout the day and continuously work towards them. Set some goals, pull on your best senator attitude, and get ready for an amazing day ahead. Thank you.
Democrats, if you could all congregate here, and Republicans here, you have 15 minutes to sort out your policies, get your position straight, and maybe figure out what you want to do.
I don't want more nuclear weapons, espionage, or otherwise military actions against the United States.
We must challenge the regime, or change will never come, not giving the Castro regime what they want. It will only strengthen their dream of the Cold War and prolong the day when we can finally say, Cuba es libre.
After 60 years of failed policies, failed invasions, assassination attempts, embargoes, I couldn't be happier we decided to look for a new approach.
Castro is still president, and all he has caused is suffering for the Cuban people.
It is also harming the people of Cuba, denying them access to food, technology, medicine, and more.
Senator Christopher Murphy, co-sponsor of Bill S.419, believes strongly that the embargo
is outdated and is hurting the Cuban people more than it is hurting the Cuban government.
Something needs to change.
It's time to try something new. But with putting Bill 491 into place, I believe that we can make further relations with Cuba and help the Cuban people reach prosperity.
The United States and Cuba will both benefit greatly from renewed relations. It will increase travel, trade, and most of all, exchange of ideas.
It will give us a shot to build good relations with Cuba.
It is worsening our relations with Cuba.
In fact, the embargo actually created increased levels of discrimination in the Cuban population, providing the Cuban government with an excuse for its problems.
I think the government is worried because they know they've used this embargo as their excuse, and once it's gone, they will have no more excuses.
Our policy of stonewalling Cuba has not worked in the past, and it never will.
I think free travel into Cuba will be one of the main things that will fuel the Cuban economy.
It can improve our economy and Cuba's economy.
But are we willing, as a country, to sacrifice our morals, weaken our national prestige, and turn our backs on the courageous dissidents for a few dollars?
The U.S. loses billions of dollars and loses the opportunity to create thousands of jobs with the embargo imposed.
Embargo does not have a big economic effect, so it should be kept.
Dwight Eisenhower has just as much to do with the Cuban economic crisis as Fidel Castro.
The United States has already spent over $60 billion funding that has only caused Cuba to become an even poorer, dysfunctional nation.
There are $7 to $8 billion in claims by American citizens and companies that the Cuban government has confiscated. And Senator Rubio and I proposed the Cuban Normalization Accountability Act, which would require the president to address these claims before moving forward.
As a nation, we need to be there for its end so we can guide them into democracy.
I will not support any bills that look to end the embargo until there is a democratic Cuban government in place.
We can also influence the people towards democracy.
We can show the Cubans what true democracy is like.
Lifting the embargo on Cuba will not bring democracy to the nation.
We have a shot of making them a democracy. By lifting this embargo and hoping for democracy in return, however with no guarantees.
Waiting for Cuba to become more democratic does not make sense, because the purpose of lifting the embargo is to make Cuba more democratic.
We're not telling them that democracy is the best. Democracy is better. Oh, democracy is key. Let's go there.
Inspire the Cuban people with more democratic ideas. Thank you.
They will be exposed to what democracy is really all about.
And if democracy is really so important over communism, why don't we back Cuba as the Soviet Union did?
It's a sign of power and strength that we can share this freedom and democracy to countries around us.
Cuba has not shown basic human rights or commitment to democracy.
Ever since 1961, when U.S. failed an invasion to overthrow Cuba's government, mutual distrust and suspicion between our two nations has continued to rise.
We can't just talk. We have to lift the embargo to earn their trust.
Lifted, I think it'll give Cuban citizens more trust.
Awesome, people are making great points.
Really good job.
People are also, I'm hearing a lot of really similar points coming up again and again. And I feel that there's some sentiment in this room that agrees with me.
I think it's really important to bring up new points rather than just saying, I agree with the previous person, and just to add on.
I choose to respect American values. I choose to give freedom to individuals. What do you choose?
We have a moral obligation to keep this embargo up that is successfully fighting the totalitarianistic regime that has ruled over the people of Cuba and even today continues to deny the most basic human rights to its citizens. Fellow senators, I will fight for the rights of the people of Cuba and fight these bills that will only empower a ruthless and repressive regime.
We need to show them what freedom is like, show them American values, and hopefully take them out of their impoverished country.
If we lift the embargo, we are supporting the lack of the freedom of expression, association, assembly, and the press.
Until they permit free elections, freedom of speech and religion, and private property, it is in no one's interest to legitimize a Cold War tyrant.
We've already made the step of putting embassies in each other's capitals.
In terms of the economic effects that you guys have been saying, according to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the embargo cost the U.S. economy $1.2 billion a year, but that's only 0.007% of the size of the U.S. economy. Second, also, the U.S. is the only country that has this embargo on Cuba and the only country that has these trade restrictions, so you should keep that in mind. Also, the standard of living in Cuba is not all that bad. According to UNICEF, that most people have access to health, education, and housing.
It is a dictatorship, and though we want it to be something else, we must remember what it actually is.
And even though Cuba is a dictatorship, gaining the support of the people is key.
When the Soviet Empire fell, the funding was cut and the nation fell into famine for a period of time. Yet, even with the funding gone, Cuba has nowhere near the power to pose a threat to the U.S.
Iran and Sudan are perfectly legitimate countries, and therefore it is Cuba's economic choice to trade with them. The one thing that Cuba does have to do, however, is respect the UN arms embargoes on those two countries.
Supporters of keeping the embargo are the ones with their eyes open and who can clearly see the situation at hand.
It is not working. The embargo will never work.
Cuba has had free trade with market economies in Europe and Latin America for years, decades. But have they gotten any better? No.
Correct me if I'm wrong. One of the main reasons for keeping the embargo on Cuba is that Cuba's government is too repressive on its people. Am I correct?
I think by lifting the embargo,
there are plenty of governments all over the place which are very corrupt. Have you imposed embargoes on any of them? Only Cuba. It's not fair to Cuba.
All those in favor of
7-minute, unmoderated, bipartisan caucus. This clearly passes. You have 7 minutes. Use it wisely.
Prohibit the U.S. government from giving loans to a communist government unless they are in times of need, such as genocide and natural disaster.
Mass starvation.
And mass starvation.
Right.
What is the importance of the island of Cuba to the United States? Currently, what are the reasons for maintaining the U.S. trade embargo and other restrictions on the island of Cuba?
The chair would smile upon some sort of moderated debate to discuss that because we feel that some of these questions haven't been answered.
For those of you who don't know the amendments that we're planning to make to S491, they're going to be lifting travel restrictions, restricting trade between Cuba and Iran and North Korea.
These amendments will be added to Bill S491 without the deletion of any of the original clauses by the original co-sponsors. Amendment 1, lifting of the travel ban. Travel between the U.S. and Cuba shall be fully unrestricted from both nations 2 months from the enactment of this bill. The U.S. shall be fully in control of Guantanamo Bay Naval Base and all its satellite territories.
It is totally okay to have these terms in there about the leasing of Guantanamo Bay, but just remember that these terms are part of a contract, and the Senate cannot unilaterally impose these terms and say, okay, Cuba, here's what we're going to do. What you can say in your bill is that we are going to negotiate these terms and this contract with Cuba, but you cannot just say that that's what's going to exist because you're infringing on Cuba's international sovereignty.
Why would you want to empower the brutal Castro regime by giving them resources that will inevitably be used to murder and oppress the Cuban people?
The lifting of the embargo would bring a lot of new money into Cuba, and therefore Cuba will be able to relax its economic policies and its people will be able to enjoy more freedoms. Thank you.
Cuba's aid is 8.1 million economic assistance, 0.6 million refugee assistance, and 2.6 million other assistance. This is mostly medical assistance, although the $11 million total is relatively insignificant.
We'll have a quick 5-minute Q&A with the sponsors of this bill.
Why would you believe that a government that for its 56-year history has always been an oppressive dictatorship? Why would you think that Cuba would suddenly turn into a flowery oasis of democracy?
We have seen for certain for over 50 years that keeping the embargo has not turned them into a flowery oasis of democracy. So we might as well try by being nicer to the Cuban people, by letting them live, by letting them trade without the embargo, than keeping it on them and restricting them from doing so many things.
So we're going to begin with this set of amendments. Again, we need a simple majority. All those in favor of the bipartisan amendments, if you remember, this is the lifting of the travel ban and the retention of Guantanamo Bay. All those opposed? This amendment clearly fails. All those in favor of the amendment that stresses human liberties and creates a subcommittee, please raise your placards now. The entire This amendment clearly fails. All in favor of not lending funds to the Cuban government until they convert to democracy and urging them not to trade with Iran and North Korea, please raise your placards now. All those against. This amendment passes. All those in favor of this amendment, which removes travel restrictions, which and waits for Castro to resign, please raise your placards now. This amendment fails. We now have 2 bills on the floor which you need to vote on. The first is Bill 491 with the amendments proposed by Morin and Boozman. The second is Bill 1543, that is as it stands. All in favor of Bill 491 as amended.
It's very important that you raise your placards and keep them high.
All those against. This bill passes.
funding to pass a bill that would indeed lift the embargo on Cuba from long-standing U.S. policy. Mitch McConnell.
Yes. Oh my God. Motion for a revote?
This debate is closed.